Hi everyone. Caresoft Technology would like to welcome you to FedRAMP 20x in motion, what early results mean for federal agencies. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Aidan Osborne, our FedRAMP program manager here at Caresoft. The floor is all yours, Aidan.
Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you all for coming to join us today. Really excited. We have a great panel for you. We have Dale Hoke, who's the CISO at RegScale, and Daniela Katedou, who's the CTO at the Cloud Security Alliance. Really excited to dig into some discussion here about FedRAMP 20x. And so let's jump right into it. So set the stage here. Just get everyone on the same page. 20x, new initiative by the FedRAMP PMO. And Dale, just tee it up for you here. How does the new 20x approach differ from the traditional Rev 5 pathway?
Well, traditionally, FedRAMP Rev 5 has been really linear, right? Document heavy process, which you write a giant SSP, you do a big annual assessment, you send static artifacts back and forth to the three PAOs, and you scramble to get things done. And everybody braces for shock once a year, right, with a big audit coming, and then you scramble around to get everything in place. 20x is designed to kind of solve that problem. It doesn't change the underlying NIST 853 Rev 5 controls, but it fundamentally changes how we prove they're working. So instead of doing point-in-time PDF-driven assurance, 20x really emphasizes automation over manual evidence, right? Pulling logs, configuration files, test results via integrations instead of screenshots and spreadsheets. Continuous assurance over annual events, right? So you're doing this 24/7, 365 and being audit ready, right? And your checks are tied to real telemetry and configuration baselines and monitored and managed in real time. And then your outputs are standardized and machine readable data, right? Whether it's OSCAL, JSON, you're using stored data, structured data. So control implementations, POEMs, and evidence can be reused. And it's really a risk-focused effort, right? Where the agencies are accepting risk and we're managing risk where it should have been managed for a long time rather than in the top-down kind of waterfall approach. It's really dynamic. So Rev 5 is what we must do. 20x, the 20x pilot is to change how we do it, moving more towards a faster, more automated, and continuously available audit-ready set of documents.
And that automation piece is definitely huge. It's cutting down the timelines, getting more solutions in the hands of our government agencies. And to that automation piece, for you, Daniela, automation is central to compliance and assurance modernization. Can you provide an overview of the key pillars for compliance automation?
Absolutely, and with pleasure. Well, I would say that there are like 5 elements that we should focus on. The first one is control. The second part is the engineering. The third is kind of the infrastructure, then the output of the infrastructure, so the evidence, and then the reporting back. When we talk about controls, so the first step is certainly the understanding on how the controls are normalized and what are the technical controls that need to be implemented. And then we move into the translation of those generic controls in technical controls and the engineering of those controls within the CI/CD pipelines, which is basically the step number 1 in order to be able to drive the automation. The engineering, of course, is just setting the stage for what it has to happen later, which is the actual monitoring, continuous control monitoring, and continuous control auditing. And for that, of course, you need an infrastructure, you need technology that is able to generate the evidence that eventually are going to be examined by the auditor and reported back and shared with the rest of the community. So, I mean, I think those are the main pillars each organization should be focusing on. Each one of them is critical. And if I would need to pick one, certainly the engineering portion is key, because that is the way in which the infrastructure is going to be enabled. Without a proper engineering of the controls within the CI/CD pipeline, I'm afraid it's going to be tough to institute any good approach to automation.
And what would you say that proper engineering would look like? Is that depend case by case basis or?
I would say absolutely yes. Of course, I mean, CSA, we are also in the business of trying to develop guidance on how to engineer controls within the CI/CD pipelines. But to your point, those controls are very context specific, are very much dependent on the nature of the technology that you're using. And therefore, the engineering of those controls within the CI/CD pipeline is very much dependent on the nature of the technology. Again, there are always good and best practices that you can use in order to make that possible. But generally speaking, it's a very tailor-made type of approach.
Very interesting. And to continue on this automation line of thought, again for you, Daniela, and Dale, feel free to add on. Automation is a big part of 20x, like we were saying. How is AI or tools like RegScale changing the daily workflow for compliance and security teams?
Well, I would say no. Latin would call it conditio sine qua non, which basically means the precondition, the condition without which you cannot do. Technology is going to be essential. I mentioned earlier on that the engineering step is absolutely key. But once the good engineering work has been done and there's been a lot of, all the engineering of the GRC pipeline is done, you need a proper infrastructure in order to be able to monitor and collect evidence. So absolutely tools like RegScale are essential. Without that, you cannot do.
And I would agree. So I think more specifically along the evidence piece, right? You're talking about being able to automate and curate evidence, right? And instead of scrambling around to find it at the last minute, it's available. Now, you can keep an eye on your enterprise, right, through the use of evidence. So it's really dynamic operational controls assurance where you take your security operations, your good security operations that everybody pays a ton of money for already, right? And through the use of automations, you collect that evidence and you maintain it rather than scramble to find it at the last minute, right? And you're talking about, it used to be manual gap analysis on where are the deltas. Right now, you're talking assisted triage, using AI and automation to gather it. Where's your problems? Tell me the things I need to know to make better risk assessments against the evidence. And that's just something that we're just starting to dabble into with AI. The key piece is compliance teams, security teams, CISOs are not going to be able to maintain point-in-time analysis with the spread that we're seeing across the cloud, right? This manual process is every 3 years scrambling to find these things. Automated evidence collection is going to be the key. So to Daniela's point, engineering planning to do that now, if you haven't done it already, is critical. And 20x kinds of puts us into that thought process of how do I automate it? How do I maintain it? And how am I always audit ready?
Yeah, and if I may add that, the only point on which perhaps I wouldn't say I disagree, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the AI role in this discussion, not to underestimate the impact that AI is going to have on auditing, but AI is not going to be essential for automation. It's going to be an additional element of improvement, but you can certainly do automation without AI.
I agree. I agree to that. AI is just kind of another tool in the toolbox. Automation and AI are different. And AI, I want to also add to that, Daniel, you bring up a great point. AI isn't without risk, right? So automation, right? Automation you could build and it will be relatively risk averse. AI, right? You don't want to be setting that up to run independently, right? So you have to plan to use AI and use it responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as an additional point there, where we need to be careful with the AI adoption, even though I'm very confident that in the space of months, this is going to be better and better. But certainly, what is going to be key for the success of any credible automation exercise in the space of compliance is reliability over the quality of the evidence. So you don't want to leave that to a stochastic system. You want to make sure that you can fully rely on the evidence that are generated by the monitoring infrastructure.
I agree.
And so, Dale, you actually, I mean, both of you guys touched on this. With FedRAMP 20x, with the automation and everything that's going on, a lot of what 20x is about is doing things faster and smarter. And so, what is that, Dale? You touched on this. What does that really mean for the teams on the ground? And how have you seen organizations adapt to this new approach?
Well, the what we saw in the original set of pilots for 20X was figuring it out, right? So you got to remember, with 20X, a lot of these programs are now just figuring it out. And I think the goals um, I think that the goal should be design. You need to design for evidence from day one, right? You need to make sure that you are deploying a new service. You're asking where's the evidence coming from and how am I going to maintain it, right? So you have to ask the right questions. The second is they align security engineering and compliance together, which is what Daniela was talking about, right? So it's no longer we're moving away from what compliance used to be, which was a checklist, and moving into engineering for security and taking that value and bringing it to the front of the stage. And you're moving, they have to move from big bang audits to incremental attestations, right? So everything with a ConMon, continuous monitoring, and continuous ATO is really small attestations to the state of your evidence over periods of time, so that you're ready to go during the course of your next audit. And you really need to rebuild your muscle memory around automation, right? So we see this every day in the industry, and I'm sure Daniela can attest to this, is I do things this way, and I've done them this way for 10 years, and I'm more comfortable with the evil I know rather than the evil I don't. So that instinct stops being, let me open Excel, it becomes, how can I make a platform pull and map this automatically, and how do I optimize my resources, right? So the thing is we have to remember that nobody's going to steal work from you. They're just going to give you more, right? So it's a funny thing about work is they just keep piling it on top of you. The idea around automation is taking the things that a computer can do better, faster, cheaper, right? And using the people for what they were intended for, which was engineering and applying good security and monitoring and doing the effort of keeping America safe versus the what I'll call corporate tax of all of the manual efforts that they lay on to validate these things. I think automation is the key there. Daniela, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I can add a couple of thoughts, but you covered that extremely well. Something that certainly is noticeable that those who are embracing automation, they are kind of moving from a situation where team is moving from being like documentation writers into more kind of security engineering. So rather than spending like months in writing up the narrative around how a certain control has been implemented and what are the policies and procedures and the screenshot to be attached in order to demonstrate that documentation is all to a situation where instead you are more focusing on, as I said earlier, engineering compliance into the CI/CD pipeline. So a sort of like compliance as a code team building exercise. Now, you will forgive me for using the terms compliance as code because it sounds like a lot as a buzzword, but essentially that is, what is all about. Then perhaps another area where we can see some noticeable changes is also kind of the investment in platform. We all know that in the space of compliance, the Graal has been very often Excel or some sort of Jira on steroids for developing kind of ticketing system in order to be able to figure out how to track a certain workflow. And now this is moving and is moving in the direction of investments into platform that can automate the overall GRC approach and generate evidence in a machine readable format and so on and so forth. The other area that I would like to point out is kind of a tendency on a more an higher level of maturity in the space of continuous monitoring. Clearly, if you want to enable continuous monitoring, there are some precursory steps that you need to take because you need good data in order to do automation. So you need real-time logging and SIEM capabilities, automated vulnerability scanning and remediation, API-driven evidence collection. So all of that, it comes through a process of investment. And this is, I guess, something that everyone should be very cognizant about. Automation and continuous compliance is going to reduce cost long term, is going to free up resources to move into operational security. But as any investment, it requires an initial sacrifice in order to build that necessary level of maturity that is needed in order to make a step forward.
And you both touched on this, and it seems like there is a very interesting opportunity for 20x with the automation taking off some of the legwork burden on employees and to give them a chance to actually, like Dale, you were saying, potentially make things more secure from an actual security standpoint. And it could be really interesting to see as the pilot progresses what that continues to look like, but very interesting to see what could happen as automation is introduced and as the people are able to start focusing on the outcomes more. And also, we just got a question from the audience, and they were wondering, will FedRAMP 20x lead to a lower bar of entry for new cloud providers? Because right now, with the Red 5 approach, there's significant cost and time that makes it very expensive for many companies that are trying to break into the federal government.
So
That's a very good question. I would say that it clearly it depends. Certainly, my hope is that that barrier to entry is going to be removed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for organization with a long history and past and with possibly some technical depth, that it will require quite an adjustment in order to move from classical compliance to continuous auditing and automation. But for those organizations that, for instance, are cloud native, where so the automation of the pipeline is a daily business, where the idea of infrastructure as code is the norm, then I will say that yes, finally we could see a reduced barrier to entry. That, to note very well, it doesn't mean that we are lowering the level of rigor or the level of assurance that can be provided. We are simply making things in a smarter way.
I would agree with that. I would say that I do believe that I do believe that with the proper planning, the barrier of entry is going to be lowered, and I think it was lowered by design. In the original 20x conversation, one of the big things that a lot of smaller companies run into is obtaining an agency sponsor. You used to go into the JAB, you'd sit, you could sit and wait to be reviewed by the JAB for long periods of time and never get reviewed. So you spend a lot of money with no return on investment. So here, Well, I think you're going to see a lower cost to achieve your outcomes. And I think that the removal of the requirement for an agency sponsor, if 20x is adopted in the way it is right now, is going to be a key piece to bringing innovation to the government faster, and allowing agencies to kind of shop through and pick them up, with something that's already approved. So I think the barrier of entry will be slightly lower, but I also anticipate a different set of problems, right? That we just haven't discovered yet. Because 20x is starting to reveal some things that they necessarily didn't plan on. The original pilots, they found some things like how do you interpret the KSIs and how do you do different things. So I believe that the intent is to lower the barrier of entry. I think that it's going to accomplish that partly, but I also see that we're going to run into problems around interpretations at some point.
That's a very interesting point that in the future of when we're trailblazing new ground, you don't know exactly what you're going to find yet. But you, Daniela, brought up a great point of that I think a lot of people should walk away from this with is that the barrier to entry should be lower, but the security should be the same, if not better, from 20x. So it's just because it's maybe easier now to get the authorization in, or at least that's the plan, the actual outcomes of it should still be a secure solution.
Yeah. So Aiden, to that point, it will be easier for those that are doing things by the books and in the proper way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, we've been talking a lot about it with just the compliance and the automation piece. And Daniela, for you, the goals of compliance, automation, and continuous assurance go beyond the 20x activities. And what are the other industry initiatives that support the objectives of modernizing compliance and assurance?
Well, this is, thank you very much for the softball. As if, CSA certainly is at the very center of this exercise. We started, several years ago, a process to move towards continuous assurance. And we recently, at the RSA 2025, we launched a new initiative called Compliance Automation Revolution. This is an initiative that has been in the cooking for nearly 18 months, finally revealed at RSA, as I mentioned. And the idea behind this initiative, which is supported by most of the industry players within the CSA constituency, is the one to enable compliance automation and continuous assurance. Now, that means nothing and can mean a lot, because essentially the idea is to kind of standardize beyond the scope of FedRAMP 20x the approach to automation and continuous assurance. That means making sure that we are rebalancing the how can I put this? Rebalancing the tension that it exists between compliance and operational security. We all know that unfortunately, especially in the past few years, with a lot of pressure coming from a lot of new laws and regulation, and I'm based in Europe, so you can understand that we see a new law or regulation popping up every second Tuesday. So that makes the life of those who need to kind of build compliance and security extremely difficult. Now, in order to kind of simplify the landscape and make sure that we are rebalancing, as I said, duration between operational security investment and compliance investment, is brought to a situation where we put less money in trying to demonstrate that we are doing things correctly, as opposed to kind of investing money in improving our security posture. And that goes through an exercise of reducing the overlap that clearly exists between all the 100+ laws and regulation around the globe that are affecting cloud. It's about normalizing the controls and trying to speak the same language, moving from a situation where controls are expressed in natural language in a situation to a situation where we start expressing control into machine-readable format, and finally a situation where we can normalize and standardize all the steps I was referring to at the very beginning of this conversation. So the normalization of the controls, the engineering portion, the building of the monitoring infrastructure, and finally identifying standard for determining what a suitable evidence look like. Because this is not going to be anymore about how I can document my security posture, but it's about how I can find the evidence that I can use to undisputably demonstrate that I'm satisfying not just the FedRAMP requirements, but also the GDPR requirements, the DORA requirements, the ISO 27001, the SOC 2, the CSA star, etc., etc., etc. So for those of you that are, curious to know more about the CAR initiative, please feel free to ping me after this event. You will be, I'm sure, shared my contact details, so feel free to contact me.
Cool. We got another question from the audience here, and the question is, what other machine readable formats are we looking at other than OSCAL and JSON?
Well,
So
honestly, sorry, go ahead, Dale.
yeah, so FedRAMP has it. So the guidance is any machine readable format. FedRAMP hasn't come out and picked a favorite. They haven't mandated any of the single requirements. The two that I've seen really used are OSCAL JSON. YAML has been discussed. So it's any machine readable format that can produce the outcomes of documentation required to run the package through the 20x program. And if you look at it, Pete Waterman and his team do a good job of advertising all of these things. You can look at it at on the GitHub chat, or you can catch it on LinkedIn a lot. So they haven't really standardized any of the machine readable formats. They will accept any of them as long as you can show proof that it actually works.
And that really ties in, I mean, to just the foundation of the 20x initiative is if you can show that it works, you can do it your way. If you can show that it works, then it works. It's not, don't have to fit. It's not supposed to be as rigid. It's supposed to help out, let the industry do things their way. If it works, not force them to do something another way.
Well, and the other thing is industry bringing a different outlook to federal government, which is something that's been sorely needed, right?
Yeah.
You talk about that with the CAR initiative and various other initiatives. How does industry recommend you do it, and is the government listening? Which Pete has said several times that the government is listening. So you bring a good idea, right? And it makes sense. You can prove it works. It's not going to be turned away.
And this is that's actually a perfect segue into our next question for you, Dale. Talking about how the government is listening. With this initiative, collaboration between the CSPs, agencies, and 3PAOs is more important than ever. So how has the 20x initiative changed the way that these groups have been working together?
Well, historically, the CSPs, the agencies, and the 3PAOs often operated in a serial format, right? CSP builds the package, the 3PAO shows up once a year and assesses the package, the agency reviews it, blesses it, sends it off to FedRAMP. 20x is pushing us toward a shared operating picture, and it kind of looks like you're sharing data, not just shared documents, right? So you're taking the data that you build and using that in near real time to provide your evidence. So instead of emailing PDFs back and forth, we're increasingly sharing the actual dashboards, the data sets, and the standardized evidence reviews that all three parties can look at one time, right? So an auditor come into a platform like RegScale, take a look at the assessments, run against the security plan, and then actually be able to conduct the audit, in near real time with the evidence that's been pulled from, a minute or an hour a day, rather than something that is a screenshot, right? It's not a point in time, it's real time. It's more frequent. You're getting much smaller touch points, right? Agencies at 3 PAOs aren't necessarily involved at assessment time. they can continuously check and monitor results, configuration drift and POAM status on a more regular cadence, right? Particularly between the CSPs and the agencies. That collaboration becomes a lot easier, right? It's not a monthly meeting, right? They can go into the platform and look at the things in near real time, and save everybody the time and effort of that type of collaboration. It's really, and the thing is that you're knocking down stovepipes, because compliance has been nothing but stovepipe lines of communications. The security guys, the compliance guys, that you add your agencies, your 3PAOs. We're breaking down all those walls and improving communication. And you're really getting a clearer division of responsibilities around the automation. CSPs own instrumenting their environments and integrating tools. 3PAOs focus on validating the correctness and completeness of the curated evidence provided by the automation, and the agencies focus on their risk posture and making authorization decisions based on data provided in near real time, not point in time, right? So the net effect is less surprise, less rework, and more of a partnership across everybody that's involved. And we're all looking at the same telemetry instead of debating what a screenshot really proved from 3 months ago, right? So, I mean, all of that kind of summarizes in it's moving faster, cheaper, and is more reliable.
And we got a great question from the audience relating to this relationship between the agencies and CSPs and 3PAOs, and it's a two-parter. And so the first part, are government agencies ready to receive OSCAL packages? Which is
No.
that's very interesting. Yeah, well, that'll be an interesting part. And then also, where does the 3PAO come into the picture with FedRAMP 20x?
Well, so there's two forms. So on the OSCAL question, there are some that can do it, right? That have purchased platforms and actually rely on OSCAL. So there's platforms that can process the OSCAL. So there's no mandate for them to do it. So the capability exists. There's no mandate because nobody has settled on what the format should be, right? So FedRAMP hasn't taken a position. I think the agencies have the ability to demand OSCAL files or a machine-readable format. Some of them are in a position where they could do it, and others aren't quite there yet. And I didn't catch the second part of the question because I was really thinking about the first one because it was a great question.
Yeah. The second part was, where does the 3PAO come into the picture with FedRAMP 20x?
So I'm going to be honest with you. I think that with the FedRAMP 20x piece in its current version, right, in the testing phase of 20x, they're an integral part of this from day one, right? Because they've got to KSIs are different, right? They've got to figure out how they are assessing them. They got to work with the CSPs and get some kind of agreement there, right? So it's no longer this subjective way of doing things where I provide an artifact request list. Like, it's a real-time deal. And on the first, when they were doing the low assessments, right, some of the 3PAOs and the CSPs were talking about how there was a lot of time in figuring out how KSIs need to be assessed. I think they've kind of crossed that bridge, but the 3PAOs to me are an integral piece of this, because if you build something and they don't agree with the interpretation that you reached, then that could be bad come audit time. So you need to be coordinating with your 3PAOs right now. Like I've been talking to my 3PAO, and not just mine, several different 3PAOs about interpretations, how to go about doing it, what's the best way of doing it, right? So you really need to collaborate in order for this to be successful.
If I might add to that,
Please.
What I can certainly, I can forecast is a change in their role, an evolution of their role, in a way that they are not going to simply look into the documentation and verify if there is enough supporting evidence to justify the claim. As we mentioned in the beginning, this whole automation story, it's about a number of different components. So today, to Dale's point, first of all, they will need to figure out if the controls in place are suitable to satisfy the KSI, which is a step number one. But also, they will need to validate if the infrastructure that is used for the GRC automation, for the continuous control monitoring piece, is secure, because that is a substantial piece of the overall story. As in, if the monitoring infrastructure is not able to provide reliable information, I mean, that's going to be a big showstopper. So not just like auditor, as in the sense of analyzing documentation, but also security tester of the suitability of the monitoring infrastructure. So I expect their role to change quite a bit and become a bit more technical than it used to be.
Interesting. And we got another audience question. Just keep them rolling. Great questions, guys. Speaking of federal agencies, how does the 20x interface comply with NIST and FIPS requirements? Until this is solved, there will still be a disconnect.
Well, the underlying the underlying pieces of NIST and FIPS are still there, right? So the KSIs were built around the actual controls, right? So the idea of the NIST 853 and the FIPS requirements doesn't go away. So, and if you talk about, the requirements for FIPS 140-2/3 compliance, all of that stuff was still baked in there largely, and where they found that there's gaps, right? The point of the pilot program is to identify those gaps and to address those gaps. So that's a great point, right? Because the NIST and the FIPS are kind of compliance centric, where KSIs and the shift to security accommodates automation and technology. The two will be merging, and that's kind of the point of the pilot of the 20x pilot program. As you go through it, as they identify gaps, they close those gaps. They've addressed different things, like they've addressed significant change requests to notifications. They've addressed vulnerabilities and how they're managed, right? So as you go through and discover where the gaps are there, I fully anticipate them to fix them. So I think that the crux of the NIST and the FIPS is still in play, and the KSIs are just a different way of looking at that. And Daniela, did you have anything you wanted to add there? Because I'm sure.
I'm actually very happy with your answer.
Yeah, see, I like getting it right. If Daniela agrees, that means that I did the proper amount of homework.
Well.
And also just a self plug for myself here. When they released the KSIs, they did release a mapping to the 853 controls that could map to each of the KSIs. So I created a little Excel spreadsheet that maps each of the KSIs to the different controls and NIST controls that fit within them. So anyone watching this wants to have a look at that spreadsheet, feel free to ping me and I can send that over. But yeah, and then we got another question from the audience. Other than SSP, have you seen any use cases where OSCAL is being used for Conmon and the agencies are accepting it?
In test cases, yes, right. And I think that hasn't kind of gone widespread, but we're working with several agencies that is on their roadmap to accomplish, right? Because just DHS is one, right? Where automating the Conmon process and what that looks like is a key piece, and our guys are working on it. So it's not widespread right yet, because everybody was looking on the front end, but now as you get into the operational side of maintaining the FedRAMP packages, there's a lot of people that are looking at that. So we're looking at it with our agency sponsor, and I know that that's a big target for a lot of other platforms, is to generate those reports using automation. And the agencies are all kind of moving towards that. If DOE was talking about it, USPTO was talking about it, State Department has been talking about it, because there's a lot of value there. There's a lot of time wasted in reviewing these manual reports and going down and doing gap assessments and validating POAMs and all that type of stuff, where automation can do that. So 20x kind of talks about how you get your authorization. I think a big piece of it as well that people don't talk about enough is how do you maintain it? And I think that Conmon piece is a key piece there.
And Dale, you've done a lot of work so far now with the 20x initiative and also with Rev 5 at RegScale. What's one surprising lesson that you've learned while helping teams move forward from the traditional Rev 5 process to the 20x model?
Okay, I'm gonna make some people mad with this answer, right? Because that's kind of what I do. Um, yeah, the problem isn't the big surprise. The problem isn't the hardest part, isn't the technology. It's the bad habits that we've developed over 15, 20 years. And we just kind of hold on to them, right? Because we're always afraid of making change and then our package becomes invalid. And right. So, most teams already have all of the tools. A lot of them are already cloud native. They already have great security services. They have the seams. They have good configuration management, right? Our previous compliance way of doing things can be applied, and we spend a lot of time and effort to build good programs, right? Now we just need to automate those good programs and do away with the waste, right, that we built into them. And my boss, Travis Howard, and the CEO and co-founder of RegScale says this, like, I used to do this work, and this is his words, I used to do this work and with the idea of no hope, right? So why would you want to operate in the idea of that there's no hope, there's no light at the end of the tunnel? 20x in automation is that hope, right? So we have to change the way that we do things and the way that we look at things. And quite frankly, if you're not changing your thought process, if you're not embracing thought leadership around this, you're kind of missing an opportunity. So we need to let go of those spreadsheets. I know, guys, we love them, but I set them on fire wherever I can. Get rid of the spreadsheet. Let's start standardizing machine readable models and accepting that continuously updated records. Accepting that a continuously updated record is where we need to be, right? Something that is in near real time. So I think one summary there is the most surprising lesson is 20x is as much an organizational change, right, as it is a technical one. The mindset shift is where we really need to focus, right? And initiatives like CSA's CAR program and 20x and various other things, how do we automate? How do we change that thought? Is really a key piece of this is the retraining of compliance and not looking at it as the compliance checklist that used to be, but operational security, right, which results in compliance.
And another question from the audience here, given your experience dealing with 20x so far, that the main challenges of really with Rev 5 is just the timeline and the cost is very, very burdensome and often too high of a bar for many to get over. Given the automation, what is the estimated time reduction from the initial product registration to final authorization?
Now this is so I'll give you the Rev 5 answer first, right? So with automation on Rev 5, right, between the writing and the collecting of evidence and getting it into audit, you're looking and this is estimate for 3 PAOs that do professional services. You're looking at anywhere between 4 and 5 months, right? We were able to do it using automation, automated evidence collection. And Danielle, put your fingers in your ears. The control, the AI to help write the control statements, and then validate some of those control statements and automation to collect it, right? So all of that working together, we were able to get an SSP done with the evidence collection in about 3 weeks. And then from there, right, to the actual gap assessments and the audit, we started our audit. Now, there was a whole audit drama that I won't go into, but we started our audit actually in the November timeframe, and we were authorized by May. So and that is kind of uncommonly fast. And granted, there was the change into promising the package would be validated faster and a bunch of other things. And I think we kind of hit the wave at the right time. But those packages used to take 18 months to 2 years to do the review and do all the process. Now let's add OSCAL, right? Let's add a machine readable. Now you're taking all that validation that's required and making it light years faster, right? So 20x is set to reduce that more, right? So the idea of being continuous ready, right, means I don't have to scramble and find evidence. The 3 PAOs have it there. They can see it at any time. I don't have to do the artifact request list and go dig for the stuff. It's always there because I'm working off one that I'm working with the 3 PAO. There's just so much time savings that it really behooves everybody to kind of take a look at the process.
And if I may add to that, I think the benefit in terms of cost saving, it goes well beyond FedRAMP compliance.
Mhm.
I can appreciate that, many are interested in FedRAMP, but there are several organizations that are targeting different markets. So they will need to extend their compliance scope to other standards and other approval process and certification process than FedRAMP. And one of the positive externality of this automation approach is that an evidence that is machine readable and has been generated by a thorough and well-built process is going to be usable also for your ISO 27001 audit, for your SOC 2 audit, for your STAR certification audit, etc., etc. So it's kind of the concept of certify once and comply many is very much one of the positive externality of this export.
That's a great point, Danielle. Thank you for adding that. I completely I got so FedRAMP focused I forgot there's other people out there.
And also just something for the audience to consider, that FedRAMP 20x was launched in March. And so all these companies are starting new, just like the rest of us. And since then, there's already been 27 submissions, 13 authorizations. Like the scalability is definitely there, and it's only going to get faster as the pathway gets refined. So there's definitely, if you're looking at the Rev 5 pathway and the time and cost as a big barrier, there's a lot to be optimistic about seeing what's happening with the pilot so far.
And that's a great point. And I think it's I think you bring up the right word, optimism, right? We have hope. This it's changing. People are seeing that there's a problem and we're addressing it. Right. I think 20x was born out of necessity, but I think they're going in the right direction. And it's nice to be able to talk about um, the compliance solution solving problems rather than giving you more.
Um, I'm not gonna be the party pooper here, but and I'm optimistic by nature, but I think just one caveat or element of warning, and it goes back to one of the questions that we got from the audience about how capable are going to be the agencies to receive these machine readable format. Um, because at the end of the day, even if an organization get approved very fast, the risk owner is going to be the agency. So it's going to be up to the agency to say, well, even if you're approved, I can pick you as a provider or not, depending on my perception of risk. So we need to stay positive, but we need to make ourselves, we need to make, we need to have no illusions that we need to go necessarily through the process of educating not just the ecosystem within the industry, but also the agency for them to understand what this is all about. Because otherwise, it's going to be difficult for them to properly measure risk based on this new configuration on how evidence are produced and generated.
That is a very good point. I mean, getting the whole industry on board is one thing. Getting the agencies on board is what's really going to make this whole thing, make the car drive. That'll be the engine getting it going. So definitely an important piece. And like you said, the education piece of educating not only the industry but the agencies is hugely important for them to understand that there is a opportunity for 20x to be more secure and deliver faster. And if getting those agencies on board with that will be a huge piece in being able to scale this initiative. And let me see, we got one more question. Oh yeah, one more question from the audience. It sounds like the 20x solution is automation focused, but how are the associated controls that require policies and procedures validated and verified? Is there a manual component involved?
I think you're never going to get away from that. So yes, there is, right? The KSIs are available on the FedRAMP website and various other places, right? So you can look. But yes, it validates that you have policies, but it does it it doesn't apply it like all the different dash ones, right? It's more of do you have a security program?
And one addition there, and perhaps one clarification. When we talk about continuous assurance, when we talk about continuous monitoring, uh, of course, we shouldn't interpret that word as in every second, only real time,
Yeah.
because that concept of continuous is very much policy and context dependent. As in, you're going to have controls that have an associated policy that the control has to be verified every minute or every second. Then you're going to have control, some of the policy control more specifically, or higher policy controls that will need to be validated every 3 months or every 6 months. So in this context, I guess we should read the word continuous as continuous within the context in which the control operates, because not everything has to be checked every second. Otherwise, it would be unnecessarily expensive, and it's not going to add any value.
And I think something Danielle, that's a great point. And I think something I want to add is this also brings into other efforts that kind of apply to the 20x program, right? Where you start thinking of policy as code and infrastructure as code, right? So you have a policy, access control policy, these different things. These translate to policies in the platform, and how am I automatically monitoring and setting up to prevent those things from violating policy, right? So there's different ways to kind of validate policy, in a cloud infrastructure. So you take your written policy, you apply it as policy that actually does something, and then you monitor the policies that are doing something, which is traditionally referred to as policy as code. Like, you must be encrypted in transit, you must be encrypted at rest, you must have these permissions to do things. And then you have to set up this baseline. So that's infrastructure as code. So you can start to codify a lot of the things that are considered manual now.
And so, I mean, we've done a ton of talking about 20x and what some of the benefits, some of the shortfalls, and just as an action item for some of our audience members, for if a company is just starting to prepare for FedRAMP 20x, where should they focus first to get that biggest impact? And I'll start with you, Daniela, but also am intrigued to see what Dale has to say as he's gone through it.
Well, I guess if it wasn't clear from my initial statement, I guess that the portion of the engineering of controls is going to be key, in my opinion.
So I to add to that, I kind of, when we have these conversations, right? I have these conversations quite a bit as people actually are thinking about FedRAMP 20x. I recommend 3 starting points, right? And they're going to get largely sound a lot like what Daniela said earlier, right? Which is centralize your system of record for controls and evidence, right? Put it in one spot. If you're not in a platform, you should pick a platform. It's going to be helpful. Pick a platform to be a single source of truth. Controls, tests, and evidence aren't scattered all over the place. So that's kind of the key piece first. Centralize it, single pane of glass. Second is instrument your environment for continuous evidence, right? Think through, what are my evidence requirements? What do I need to show? And engineer that out, to Daniela's point. And the third would be adopt a standard set of mappings, right? Structure your SSP and control sets to produce the automated formats you need easier, right? And if you get these foundations right, everything around 20x activities, the reuse of frameworks, the CATO, continuous monitoring, becomes much easier to build on, and then you kind of land and expand from there.
Dale, that's cheating. It was supposed to be one only.
I'm sorry.
And then for our government audience that are in here, what is kind of like their takeaway as far as FedRAMP 20x and approaching that from the agency perspective?
Wow.
Yeah, that would, man, hold on. I'm gonna have to figure, I'm gonna have
If
to
I
think on that
can,
one.
I mean, to my previous point, move beyond the resistance to change, because that is going to be
Yeah.
the biggest factor for the improvement. At the end of the day, the risk owner, so the agency, as the mandate to make sure that they are buying the most secure solution possible. And what this innovation that the innovation that FedRAMP 20x is bringing, it's about that. It's about increasing the level of assurance that they can get out of the companies that are listed or the services that are listed. That it doesn't come for free. They will need to make that time investment in getting educated on how they can use that information to their service. This is going to enable them to have better risk management, but again, before they can get that reward, they will need to make the effort to get educated on how to interpret that information.
I agree. I agree with everything you said, and I would break that down to three pieces of advice for them, right? So first is start with where your pain is, not the hype, right? There's a lot of hype. Where's my pain? How do I solve it? Second is treat the automation as augmentation, not a replacement. You're not replacing people. You're not getting rid of any of that. You're augmenting something to make it better. And then as a government agency, it's just on transparency. Everything that around the automation, everything that they're deploying should be transparent. There should be an SBOM. There should be full disclosure and honesty from industry as we go through this process, because trust is the only way that these things work.
Well, I appreciate both of you guys and your insights today. It was a wonderful discussion, had some great points that hopefully the audience can walk away from knowing more about FedRAMP 20x and what it's all about. And thank you all again. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to kick it back to Kaylin here. And yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, I want to thank all of our participants as well as our speakers, Dale, Daniele, and Aiden, for being with us today. We hope our webinar has been helpful for you and your organization. If you have any further questions or are interested in attending a future webinar, please feel free to contact Jack Doyle at Carousel. His contact information is displayed on your screen, so please don't hesitate to reach out, and thank you again, everyone, for joining.